All right, let's dive right in. We're about to unravel a mystery that's 2,500 years old. It's all about how one of the most profound ideas in human history, the concept of enlightenment, was lost, completely misunderstood, and then, amazingly, rescued. You know, it all starts with a question every single one of us has probably asked at some point. Why do we suffer? For ancient Buddhist thinkers, this wasn't just some casual question. It was the central problem of our existence, and they were determined to solve it. So, here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll look at the goal, what they were even trying to achieve. Then, we'll diagnose the problem, the cause of all this suffering. From there, we'll see how the original teaching got fractured, uncover a huge misunderstanding, decode a really critical concept, and finally, see the path forward. Okay, first things first. What was the end game here? What does it actually mean to be awakened? Well, the ideal was to become what's known as an Arhat. It literally means the awakened one. An Arhat is basically someone who has cracked the code on suffering. And how they do it? By making this massive shift in how they see the world. Letting go of the idea that this physical, material reality is the only thing that's real. And instead, opening up to a much deeper spiritual perspective. That sounds pretty incredible, right? But to get there, you've got to understand the sickness you're trying to cure. So what's really at the root of all this suffering? It turns out it's this subtle chain reaction that's running our lives pretty much all the time. It kicks off with something super simple, sensation. You know, anything from our six senses. That feeling then sparks a craving, this kind of unquenchable thirst for more of what feels good and way less of what feels bad. And that craving, it eventually hardens into attachment, where our mind just latches on and refuses to let go. The final, unavoidable link in that chain is suffering. So, you ask, what's the one thing that connects this whole chain reaction? What's the root of it all? Well, it's us. It's our own sense of self, the ego. This constant focus on I, me, mine, what I want, what I need, how I feel. Shakyamuni the Buddha came up with a pretty radical solution to this. He called it no self. He taught that this solid, permanent self that we're all clinging to, it's actually an illusion. It's just a temporary construction, something our senses build up moment by moment, and because this self has no real, independent existence, he described it as being empty. And trust me, this idea of emptiness is going to be a huge part of our story. But here's the thing. This incredibly powerful, liberating idea, it didn't stay pure for very long. Pretty soon after the Buddha's death, his followers started to argue, and that led to a major split in the whole philosophy. You can see on this timeline just how fast things started to unravel. I mean, within a century of the Buddha's death, his followers were already splitting up. This kicked off a long period where just dozens of different schools were competing, all with their own interpretations. This period was later called Hinayana. And all this confusion is what eventually led to a new movement called Mahayana, or the Great Vehicle, that tried to get everything back on track. And that Mahayana movement was really, really needed, because this wasn't just some academic debate. The way the teaching was being fractured had some serious consequences, twisting the core idea of no self into something completely unrecognizable. Okay, this is the heart of the misunderstanding. Just look at the contrast here. On the one hand, you have the original idea of no self, which was all about spiritual liberation, freeing yourself from the illusion of the ego. But on the other side, you can see how it got twisted into a purely materialistic belief that there's just no soul at all. Freedom from attachment became this bleak idea of total annihilation when you die. A path to spiritual freedom literally became a path to pure nothingness. I mean, just think about that for a second. The very teaching that was designed to end suffering was now being used to argue that life is basically meaningless. It reduced our whole existence to just a biological blip that's over when you die, with absolutely nothing beyond this material world. It's a total 180 from the original idea. But this is where our story takes a really cool turn. A new wave of thinkers came along to fight this slide into nihilism and bring back the deeper, original meaning of the Buddhist teachings. So the Mahayana movement put the concept of emptiness right back in the spotlight. And the person who really championed this was an absolutely brilliant philosopher from the 2nd century named Nagarjuna. He saw how dangerous that materialistic interpretation was, and he used this idea of emptiness to take it apart and offer a much more sophisticated, much more profound view of reality. So what exactly is emptiness? This is so important. It does not mean nothingness. It's not nihilism. For Nagarjuna, Emptiness is the middle way. It's a reality that cleverly avoids two extremes. One extreme says the material world is all there is, and the other says nothing exists at all. Emptiness is something else entirely, right there in the middle. Now, to explain this middle way, Nagarjuna used this really clever philosophical tool called the eightfold negation. It might look a little complicated, but the goal is actually simple: to describe a deeper spiritual reality by telling you all the things it isn't. Let's actually break down what these pairs mean. First up, not born, not perishable. Right away, this challenges our everyday experience, where everything has a beginning and an end. What Nagarjuna is pointing to is something that exists outside of that cycle, an eternal spiritual life, a consciousness that doesn't get born and doesn't die, it just is. Next, we have not permanent, not annihilated. This gets into the nature of that spiritual life. It's not annihilated at death, so that whole materialistic view is wrong. But it's also not just a permanent, static copy of our physical self. It's a real existence for sure, but it's a dynamic, different, and much freer one. Now, this one is so fascinating. Not one, not different. This tackles the mystery of who we really are, deep down. It says we're not just one single isolated soul, but we're also not completely separate different beings either. It suggests something really beautiful, that we are both unique individuals and part of a larger spiritual family, kind of like different facets of the same amazing diamond. And finally, not coming, not going. This one is a game changer. It means the spiritual world isn't some far-off place you have to travel to after you die. It doesn't come and it doesn't go. It's already here, right now, woven into our physical world. And it's accessible right inside our own minds. So when you start putting all these pieces together, what Nagarjuna gives us is this incredibly powerful and really inspiring new way of looking at reality itself. And this is it. This is the final rescued meaning. Emptiness is not a void. It is spiritual life. It is the middle way, a dynamic reality that brings the material and the spiritual together in harmony. It says that our lives have deep, eternal meaning, precisely because we are so much more than just our physical bodies. So that leaves us with a question to really chew on. If we stop looking at the world as either purely physical or purely spiritual, and instead see it as this vibrant, dynamic blend of both, well, how does that change the way we see our own lives, our challenges, and our purpose? It's a pretty big thought to carry with you. Thanks for digging into this with me today.